Thank you very much indeed, Lorraine, for that very kind introduction. So thank you to you and also to ALPS for inviting me to give this talk this morning. Also thanks to my co-speakers, to Sue and to John. I look forward very much to hearing their talks later on this morning. If I have to rush out right at the end, I do apologise, but as Lorraine was just saying, I'm the treasurer of ALPS and I've got the exciting task of presenting the annual accounts to the AGM at 12 o'clock, and I'm sure you won't want to miss that. So it feels a bit daunting, actually, addressing you this morning. You've just heard yesterday from the person that started Google Scholar, and then this morning from a very senior researcher at Microsoft, and now you've got the managing director of the British Editorial Society of Bone and Joint Surgery. Anyway, most of what I'm going to say today relates to more to journal publishers rather than to book publishers, and probably also reflects my background in STM. But I have included, where possible, some examples from HSS Publishing as well. And I'm grateful to a number of people that I spoke to about this talk who will be acknowledged at the end. So, without further ado, so do small publishers have a future? This was a comment from David Crotty, who is, I think, one of the speakers later on this afternoon. He said, the days of the small independent publisher may be numbered due to the enormous advantages of economies of scale. Well, this was 2 years ago. We still have a thriving membership at ALPS and a large number of people at our meeting. But I think it's still a serious question, the question about economies of scale. So what is a smaller publisher? I don't want to spend too long on this, but here are some suggestions that you might like to consider. And it's interesting that ALPS, which has around 340 members, the largest single component of the ALPS membership, is actually in the smallest category, around about 100 members, and those are members whose expenditure, publishing expenditure, is £40,000 a year or less. So there are large numbers of smaller publishers within the ALPS membership, and 75% of all our members have expenditure of less than 2.3 million. Just a quick slide on the British Editorial Society of Bone and Joint Surgery. We publish the Bone and Joint Journal, which used to be the British volume of the JBJS. You won't have, I'm sure most of you won't have heard of it. It's probably going to be on Have I Got News for You, I suspect, at some point in the future. And as Lorraine was saying before that, I worked at the Royal Society of Medicine, and so I've had about half my career really has been in large corporate publishers, and the latter half in smaller society, not-for-profit publishers, although, as we know, as somebody once said, not-for-profit is a status and not necessarily an objective. So here are the titles that we produce, and our leading journal is the Bone and Joint Journal, which that was all the Society did until 2012, when we added 2 new titles, and we're launching a fourth one next year. And we have 2 subscription journals, and we will, in January next year, have 2 open access journals. So one question that I think arises, and I wanted to tackle early on in this, is if we're talking about how can small publishers go global, then why not simply contract out to a much larger publisher, let them do all the hard work, monitor what they do, sit back, relax, and let the money roll in? What's wrong with that? Well, it would make a very short presentation if I stop there. But some societies have done exactly that. To take some examples, the British Ecological Society, the London Mathematical Society, and in the HSS field, the Regional Studies Association, they have all done that. And it has been a successful model for them. And normally in this model, the Society retains control of the editorial and peer review process, but then contracts out production, distribution, subscriptions, marketing and sales to the publisher. And here are on the slide some advantages and disadvantages, and there are more disadvantages I've listed than advantages, but I would just stress that this arrangement does work for for some publishers. And I think that if you look at the disadvantages, I think the corporate change over which you have very little control in those situations, the loss of control overall, the need to agree on new developments. You know, if you want to start a new journal, you can't just do that. You've got to get somebody else on board. There may be advantages in that. But I think there are some significant disadvantages. And in some cases, getting the right level of attention for your journal. Everything is promised at the pitch. I've been on that side of the fence, but when the reality hits, your journal is one of several hundred, and there are hard-pressed marketing and production people, and that I think is certainly a disadvantage. I think also open access has really changed this landscape quite significantly. And I'll say a bit more about that later on, but one of the major problems for smaller publishers is selling to library consortia. And obviously in the open access environment there are other issues, but you don't have that major issue. And I think also societies are or should be much closer to the market. You're very close to the research and academic and, in our case, practitioner community. And that has very significant advantages if you're in an author pays model. So that's one option. The other option, perhaps, is why don't you try to do everything yourself? And I think actually our own organisation has perhaps in the past been a bit like that, and we used to joke, or I joke with previous people who worked there, that if you could grow the trees in the garden and create the paper to print on, then that would be a good thing as well. And we still do. We still, in fact, do typesetting of our main journal in-house for some good reasons in relation to the amount of advertising that we carry. But in other areas, we have moved or are in the process of moving very much to industry standards. And here again are some of the advantages or disadvantages of trying to do things yourself. So the answer, I think, and this is the core really of the presentation this morning, is it lies in strategic partnerships with suppliers and with other organisations. And these are some of the areas on this slide that I'm now going to go through as quickly as I can. And I think I do think that with these partnerships in place, not only are you well placed to publish your own journals, but you're also well placed perhaps to take on journals for other societies who don't have a publishing operation, and there are many examples of this. So the first broad area is obviously international platforms, systems and standards. This is an obvious area, although there are still some small publishers who have invented or developed their own. But I think the problem in these areas, like online hosting, for example, is that the scale of investment is so large and the technology so complex that it doesn't make sense to try to do that yourself. It's also a very quick, it's a ready way of levelling the playing field. If your journals, as ours are on Highwire, then your journals, your articles, are just as visible as those that are published by Sage, a much larger publisher, or Oxford University Press. If you use Editorial Manager for your manuscript submissions, then many Elsevier authors who have used that, or the Elsevier in-house version, will be familiar, will already have accounts. So there are huge advantages, and very quickly you can level what might seem to be a somewhat uneven playing field. And there are some other areas listed as well there in relation to metrics and also to standards such as ORCID and FundRef. The next big area really is sales and marketing and associated areas. And I think it's true to say that smaller publishers, and indeed some larger ones, can't afford their own dedicated sales rep force. And there are many organisations, and I've listed some, other brands are available, but I've listed some here that provide those services very effectively. You may feel a downside of that is your titles are going to get lost with those sales agents who are acting for a range of other publishers. But the same is true, the same is absolutely true if you have your journals with a large corporate. The same risks can apply. As well as using sales agents, there are also, and clearly obviously subscription agents are there as well. The third point there is that there can be sometimes very successful partnerships with perhaps in this case, as happens to be in the examples, a larger society publisher. So the Royal College of Nursing contracted out their non-UK institutional sales to the BMJ. And the British Institute of Radiology, I gather, also does the same thing and has done that for many years, and that is a very successful model for them. And similarly on the humanities and social science side, Liverpool University Press's e-book sales, I understand from Anthony Conn, have benefited very significantly from including them in the University Press Scholarship Online product from OUP. So that's another way where, as a smaller publisher, you can level the playing field, you can get a share of a market, but without having to contract the entire operation out. Clearly also the aggregators that some of whom I've listed here, EBSCO, Host, ProQuest, Ovid, there again, they can be, we license our content to the Ovid platform. We get a very significant income from doing that, and greatly increase our visibility for those librarians that prefer to still, particularly in the medical field, to use the Ovid product. And so our titles are there. They're just as much used, just as visible as titles, obviously, from Wolters Kluwer and other titles that are on the Ovid platform. Don't forget also foreign language publishers and the opportunity they can give you to leverage. There is absolutely no obstacle to you contracting with a foreign language publisher. And actually in an area like reprints, we interestingly have outsourced that to Springer Healthcare. Springer Healthcare have a specialist rep sales force that just sell reprints and also, I think, advertising. And the income comes in the form of a royalty. There's no overhead at our end, no production, no sales, and that sales costs, no sales rep costs, and so that's proved actually a very effective process for us to do. But I would suggest keeping marketing in-house. I'll say a little bit more about that later on. I think to keep control of that, both in the sense of promotion, mailings and so forth, but also very importantly in the field of market research, surveys and focus groups. You might outsource, as we've done, specific projects to consultants, but I think to keep that closely in-house is a good strategy and is also a cost-effective one. Then there are what I've called here cross-publisher initiatives that smaller publishers can participate in just as easily as larger publishers, and again will give you a very strong, can really increase the value of your presence internationally. And we heard a bit about Chorus yesterday, and that is clearly a very useful organisation to belong to. To help you to deliver public access, to comply with funder mandates, not just in the US but also worldwide. Kudos, it happens that those two, I wrote the slide I think before knowing the shortlist for the Innovation Award, but Kudos again provides a very useful toolkit for authors to enrich and promote their articles post-publication and to use in emails and social media. Many of us already are collaborating with Research for Life, the Hinari project in the medical field, and then also in these other areas as well, in agriculture, the environment and development and innovation. And I'm sure we'll be hearing from Sue shortly on some of the specific issues of reaching these markets, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. Then the the next point, I think, is really to talk about the Independent Scholarly Publishers Group, because this is an example, again, a very good example of cross-publisher collaboration, dealing with the issue I referred to a few minutes ago of how small publishers can sell, can get the attention of library consortia, and I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. And in considering that does raise the question of course, the ALPSP Learned Journals collection. I think some of you in this room may have participated in that, and as you know, it is sadly in the process of being wound down. So I think it is, when we're considering these cross-publisher initiatives, it's worth considering perhaps what some of the issues might have been with that. Just talking to people that have been involved, I think some of the lessons might have been that there was too wide a range of subject areas included. There were quite a large number of niche and quite highly specialised journals in the package, and it was after the Sweats demise, it was difficult to find a business model to meet the costs of representation and the reporting and portal requirements. And some of you in the room who may have been involved in ALJC will perhaps have your own views, might want to comment later. But this new, it's not that new, it's been going probably for 4 years or so, but the ISPG Group is really intended to tackle this Achilles heel for smaller publishers. And this really is an issue here. You can see that in 1994, the percentage of revenue for EBSCO accounted for by the largest 10 publishers was 19%. In 2009, it had grown to 50%, and in 2013, it had grown to 68%. So these big deals, there is no doubt, are, as we all know, consuming significant amounts of librarians' budgets. But ISPG has been put together specifically to focus on medicine and the life sciences, and it is quite a tight collection of 23 publishers and about 51 journals, all highly ranked in their field, all on one major platform, which happens to be Highwire, which does greatly facilitate access and reporting and usage reports and so forth. It contains, we are part of this group along with other UK organisations like the European Respiratory Society, Society for Biology, Bioscientifica are involved, the Royal College of Psychiatrists, and then in the States, the American Academy of Pediatrics, Rockefeller University Press, and quite a few other US society publishers. So how is it done? We've got consortia deals to date in those countries. We're using different sales agents. We have the flexibility to use different sales agents in different markets. It's all coordinated by Dragonfly, by Tom Taylor, and is obviously a significant amount of work corralling a group of sales agents, the library consortia, and particularly the publishers. And I would say the verdict so far has been that we've made solid progress. I think these things always take longer than expected, but we've seen significant growth in our consortia sales, and also in an improvement in our retention of subscriptions in this area. And the decision making, you can imagine, with 23 or so publishers involved, can sometimes be slow. Some of the American societies do seem to be prisoners of their legal departments. But I would say that shows all the signs of being a successful example of a cross-publisher collaboration. And it does, for us, I feel, solve this very important issue of getting a share of the library consortia market. Just conscious of the time. So other areas of collaboration are to actually work with other publishing societies. There's an example of the societies that co-own and have their offices in Charles Darwin House in London, the Biochemical Society, the British Ecological Society, the Society for General Microbiology, amongst others. So could this lead to other opportunities for for sharing of ideas, sharing of costs between societies, or you know, perhaps to negotiate with suppliers. That's perhaps a slightly controversial area. We don't want to get into antitrust, but certainly, you know, that is one area. I think also there's for smaller publishers, the very important way of extending your reach to work with societies, with other societies that don't publish journals, to extend the reach. And we've very successfully, in my own organisation, done that over the last 2 to 3 years with online-only licensing to membership organisations in Canada, in New Zealand, in Brazil, and a big new initiative in Europe next year, in continental Europe. And that is a very good way, I think, of extending your reach. There's another example of the Royal Society and the Royal Society of Chemistry are collaborating in relation to the new Royal Society's open access journal, Royal Society Open Science, where the RSC, as I understand it, are handling the commissioning and peer review aspects of the chemistry section for the Royal Society. So that is another example of two very successful, prestigious societies collaborating together. And in our own case, I mentioned the JBJS, the Journal of Bone and Joint Surgery. For many years, they were our journal, now called the Bone and Joint Journal, was called the British volume of the JBJS. And that there was actually, although it came to an end in 2011, there was a very successful collaboration between the two volumes over many years in relation to particularly subscriptions, making it easy for individuals to subscribe, you know, with one check or credit card to the two volumes, and also in relation to advertising. There were a number of reasons why we ended that in 2011. I think we've obviously gone our separate ways, but it's a good example over some years where that worked. And finally, and I'm indebted to Ian Russell, who pointed me in this direction. A guy called Raim Crow has written really quite a detailed article, which I'm afraid I haven't read all of, but in relation to publishing cooperatives as a way forward to combat market concentration in the hands of the large commercial publishers. There are obviously, that will not be without its practical and organisational problems, but perhaps in the week when the new Labour Party is the leader of the new leader of the Labour Party is going to be elected, this approach might appeal to your inner Jeremy Corbyn. Also, networks are extremely important. I think if you're a small publisher, to have a good network is perhaps even more important than if you're working in a large publisher. Clearly, ALPSP, preaching to the converted here, but also these other organisations that I've listed there as a second bullet, and the supplier conferences that I attend, whether it's HiWire or Scholar One, that are also sources of very, very useful information, and Research for Life also organise regular strategy meetings on their areas. And clearly, you know, personal contacts and networks, I think, can also be absolutely invaluable, talking to people that are doing this, you know, facing the same issues. A word here for consultants and advisors. Somebody once said the definition of a consultant was someone who borrows your watch to tell you the time. I think that's a little bit unfair, although we've perhaps all met consultants who have been a bit like that. But we have had, I would say, an excellent experience where I work now and also my previous job, and we've used consultants in some of the areas that I've listed here: market research, focus groups, branding, citation analysis, and in terms of major IT systems procurement. And I think they can be really, really useful in terms of adding value to what you're doing. And then obviously there are other sources of advice in terms of board advisors, non-executive directors, and so forth. And I think using consultants with editorial boards can be helpful, particularly if you've got a message to get across, however convincing you may be. For them to hear it from a third party, I think has value. We have a consultant that we've used coming to our big international editorial board to report on some market research and focus groups that we ran in about 3 weeks' time, and I think that will be very helpful. So with all this talk about partnering, what should you keep close? And I think these are some of the areas here. I mean, obviously, I think content creation, commissioning and selection in terms of appointing editors who obviously must act independently, but through them you control what is commissioned and selected. As I've said earlier, for the reasons I've given, I think marketing and market research are very important functions. I think they should be retained in-house, even if you may outsource specific projects. Obviously research and development, and the whole area of what you know about your market, market intelligence, what's going on, new ideas, and the strategic development. I think that absolutely is a core function and should remain in-house. So my conclusions are that, as I've tried to set out across a rather broad canvas, but that if you select these partnerships carefully, it's a very good way without going to the degree of outsourcing completely to a large corporate publisher. These carefully selected partnerships are a very good way to expand the global reach of smaller publishers and to put your activities, your journals, your books on the same, to level that particular playing field. I think as society publishers we have a huge advantage in being close to the market, because both in terms of authors and readers, who are often the same people, frequently the same people. I think you have to find a solution to the library consortia issue. I think that is the biggest, I would say the biggest single issue. But at the same time, with the growth of open access, I think that changes the environment quite significantly. And in many ways, society publishers are even better placed. And we, it was after all PLOS who, with some helpful funding at the beginning, but PLOS who came from nowhere to launch to now have the largest open access journal, and there have been many others to follow. But I think that whole area is clearly one where society publishers can do more. And my message and my view is that smaller publishers can compete highly effectively with larger ones. Just some people to acknowledge here on the slide. Thank you very much, those of you who took the trouble to comment on some thoughts that I sent around, and I've tried to incorporate some of these people's views and comments in the talk that I've given. And thank you very much indeed.